And one of the things that I'm most concerned about is keeping their attention. It's hard enough when we're in the classroom, face to face, keeping their attention, and then we can see if somebody isn't paying attention. But when you're Zooming, it can be a lot harder, even though students today are used to looking at their cameras all the time. They're used to looking for stuff that's more interesting and action-packed. And some of our classes just aren't that interesting and aren't that action-packed. So how do we make sure that they stay engaged? And that's what it's all about, right? Making sure people stay engaged to get the information, to get the most out of their education. I think one of my colleagues at the university mentioned that their students or their parents are paying $3,000 per class, and she wants to make sure that they're still getting their $3,000 worth. So however your school is public, private, whatever, we want to make sure they're still getting the bang for their buck. So let's start out with the obvious. And the obvious for me is camera. Okay, if you've got a laptop, then you're using that nice little round camera that's right at the top, and you can see the green light when it's on. Here's the thing. If you've got an older laptop, I've noticed with some of my colleagues that for some strange reason, it just seems out of focus all the time. And I don't know why that is. It's either because the camera can't quite catch a spot for focus, or it's an older laptop. So you have a couple things that you can do here. One is make sure there's a differentiation between you and your background. One of my colleagues who uses her laptop, she's up against a white background and she has a tendency to always wear white shirts. Well, any camera that you use can't, without being able to distinguish a depth, the focus is going to be all over the place. And you may have noticed too with your own cell phones and your computer that sometimes you can't get the device to focus on the subject that you want it to. So you have to hit the cell phone and focus it on. Well, we don't have that on our computers yet. I bet that's going to be something in the future. So the best thing you can do is make sure that you're differentiated from the background. And I will point this out. You should avoid virtual backgrounds to make this optimal. If you have a virtual background, you're still going to have that same problem. Your virtual background will be in focus because it's computer generated, but you may still not be in focus because this camera is still trying to focus on something in the real world. As it happens, I have a real red curtain behind me. That's not virtual, it's real. And for many reasons that I'll get into in a little bit, there's differentiation so the camera can focus on me. Now, say you don't have that. For whatever reason, you can't make that happen. Get yourself a exterior camera that you can plug in to your computer. The tricky part about this is getting a decent one. There's lots of decent ones out there. The one I use is a Logitech Brio. It's about $120. That might be very expensive for some people. However, my university reimbursed me for it. In fact, I got them to pay for it up front. So check with your school. There are all sorts of funds out there for the COVID situation that we're in. In fact, there are special funds that they may not be able to buy you office supplies, but they can get you online Zoom equipment because it falls under a special funding. I think you guys know what I'm talking about. There's all sorts of different kind of funding out there. So get yourself a decent little outboard camera, and then you just need to have the attachments. Now make sure you have the attachments to make that work. For whatever reason, the world is still USB oriented. However, the new Mac laptops are not. So you have to get all sorts of little attachments. As it turned out, I purchased some perfect, other ones that from Mac were not. So make sure that you know what it is that your port is and what you're going from the other device. For instance, the microphone I have that I'm not using at the moment is a XLR cable, and it goes to XLR, which means I could go to an exterior recording device, but I needed something to go straight to my computer. So I look up XLR to USB, and then USB to USB-C. So it becomes complicated, but you need to make sure you have the proper adapters to make this all work. Okay, so let's go a little more into camera. Okay, you want to make sure after setting up that camera, which by the way, we can also talk about having an external camera like an iPad or a GoPro. And that there's a good reason for those, because sometimes we have a habit of not looking into our camera. For instance, I've made myself in Zoom, that's what we're using right now, I've put myself up in the middle frame. You can actually move those frames around to place people in different places. You can also choose to have the speaker being in the main spot. I tend to notice that if I'm the speaker and I keep my frame up and I'm looking at myself, it's close enough to the camera. But if you want to make sure that that's happening so that you're not pulling one of these things. It's kind of weird when people talk like that. Always be talking to your camera, so make sure that you're in the middle of the frame, because that's what draws, or the speaker that you're talking to is in the middle of the frame to keep doing that. Okay, so let's talk about that whole thing of the camera and what it's capturing. I've noticed a lot of people, and I bet you have too, have a tendency to place their laptops on the table because, hey, they're a laptop, right? Even though that's not your lap, but your tabletop. Okay, so if I do this, which a lot of people do, not only am I looking up at my ceiling, I'm looking at my nose, but I'm also not very flattering this way, okay? Some people will say, well, I'm not here to look good, I'm here to teach. Well, yeah, but you don't want any distractions. So it's better or best to look like you're talking in person. So get yourself either a computer stand, and I know it sounds like I'm talking about buying a bunch of stuff. However, I will tell you, I just use books. I have a couple of really nice art books. I have some really nice film books. I have books that are in my subject. I kind of like to do that. I pick out books that are the subject of what I'm teaching. It's just sort of inspiring to me. Maybe it's silly, but I like it. And I keep my eye level up where I would actually be looking at a student. For many students, this is actually better than in person because they're either shorter than you or taller than you. So when you're in person, you're not getting that eye level experience. Where here you have an opportunity to actually be at eye level. So make sure that camera is either right at eye level or even maybe a little higher. When it's higher, I do get rid of more of the reflections in my glasses. When it's down here, I have a tendency to see more reflections. So that can be a problem fixed by me tilting my head forward, but then I have to think about it all the time, right? Okay, so and another trick of camera placement is you want the light in front of you, not behind you. Right now, I'm getting light from the side. We're going to address that. You want the light in front of you or behind the camera, and you want to place light at no more than a quarter profile. What I mean is right now, I have full profile. It's hitting me on the side of the head, and I'm falling off into darkness here. And because I have white hair, it's blowing out. So that's easy to do by just rotating myself. Aha, see that? There's automatic adjustment. Scooch, scooch, scooch. Automatic adjustment of this little camera. Computers, cell phones, your iPad, without special software, a lot of it's free, will level out the lighting on its own. So you see I do this. It's better than when I had before. Have a little more reflection, but we can resolve that in a multitude of ways. One is just dipping my head or raising the camera. So make sure that you're lit well. Now, keeping that in mind, you want to place it in a fixed and maintained position. And what I'm talking about is the camera here, but the lights as well. You want to have it maintained. If you're moving around a lot, you're going to have, oh my gosh, I burned out really, really a lot there. And your lighting is going to change. Even your focus is going to change. And that can be very, very distracting to anybody who's listening, whether it's a student, a colleague, whatever. I'm always amazed that the interviews that we see on TV right now with news people or government officials or whomever, how bad they're set up for an interview. It's mind-boggling. It's like, have they not seen themselves? Have they not seen how other people do it? If you're a professional and you want people to pay attention to you in any way, shape, and form, make sure that you're not giving them any distractions to turn off. Any opportunity for them to be pulled away, you're going to lose your audience. And then what's the point? You're just white noise in the background. And by the way, I'm only talking about your image today. I'm not talking about anything that you're adding in. Not talking about having lessons on the board behind you. I'm going to get into that a little bit, but mostly this is what you can control with your camera. So we'll see if I step into that area. I think I do. Okay, so you want your fixed position of your camera and you want a fixed light. Okay, right now I'm not using any lighting except exterior lighting. And that can be a problem because the sun moves. right? So I either have to keep shifting or I have to have a short class, right? I want to make sure that I covered everything in camera though, because find the sweet spot, maintain this. Okay. Um, Okay, got that. Chris. Oh, by the way, I almost forgot that you can also get other exterior camera like the GoPro, like a DSLR, like some other cute mounted cameras that actually stand on their own side to the side. You can get all those. Then you kind of get more into settings. You have more control over exposure. You have more control over the depth, what's in focus, what's not, or everything being in focus. Let's see here. You will need to set your aperture, which is your lighting exposure. It gets a little technical in regards to being more like photography, but photography and cinematography are, two sides of the same coin. It makes them sound like opposites, but they're not. Maybe they're the same kind. Maybe that's a better way to say it. I'm really bad at my analogies. I'm sure somebody else can come up with something better out there. So, and then you need to be consistent with what's called ISO, or the amount of light. Okay, and that's what we're going to get here. You have to maintain consistent color temperature. Okay, I started to talk about outside lighting. That light that's coming in is a bluish light. It's about 5200 Kelvin for you science teachers out there, and it's actually bluish in tone. Sometimes when we use the wrong lighting and we're outside, something can look really orangey, or inside something can look really blue. Well, what you can do to avoid that is, if you've got outside light, stick with blue lighting. Meaning if you're going to have a little light to enhance it, like the ring light that everybody's been using. By the way, stay away from the little ring lights. Get yourself one that's at least 12 inches. But I actually like the 18-inch one, which I don't happen to have at the moment. So bad example, right? But it fills more and you're less likely to have shadows. So you've got that ring light, and it comes in 3 temperatures, all in the same light. You've got warm, you've got cold, blue, and then you've got half and half. If in this situation, I would want it blue or half and half. Sometimes the cool, as it's called, is too cool, and you look very, very blue. But in this situation, I would want to fill that light right here, because as the sun moves, my lighting's going to change. And I'm either going to open up my curtains or close my curtains. I have some curtains here, and they're pretty much opened up. It happens to be overcast here in Riverside, California. So I'm getting a nice smooth exposure without any bright highlights. Okay, you want to avoid that, because again, if you've got white hair like me, or really light blonde, it's just going to pop, and it's distracting when it looks like you have, a nuclear sight on your head. Okay, let's see here. What else about lighting? Tungsten, indoor lighting. Let's say you're in a room or in a closet somewhere. What do I mean by tungsten? That's your everyday household light. It's a tungsten light bulb. Okay, now a lot of people say, well, I have LED now. Well, LED will be either cool or warm, so you want to stay consistent with the other lights that you have that may be on in your room, whether they're ceiling lamps, side lamps, whatever. Make sure they're all the same color temperature so you're not mixing temperatures. For the most part, indoor lights are tungsten. Color temperature 3800. I should know this. For scientists out there, you can correct me. What you want to avoid, by all means, is fluorescent. Fluorescent tends to be green in tone. We don't notice this until it's up against a warm light, and then you get this greenish look, and it just makes you look kind of sick. So anyway, I have fluorescent lights in my kitchen. They're off right now. But even if I had them on, we have tungsten color temperature. So I would want to have tungsten lighting down here with the ring light and such. So pay attention to that about your color temperatures. Again, it's just all about distractions. Let's see here. I mentioned that. And your lights. You want to make sure about the distance and nearness. You can experiment. All of this, do it ahead of time. Play. Have practice Zoom meetings with your friends, with your children. In fact, the variety of ages is helpful, because everybody's going to be distracted by something different. Somebody who's older might not care. Somebody who's younger might be, oh, wait a second. You got a lot of problems going on here. The younger, and I don't mean like elementary school age, but teenagers, they're going to be more savvy about what they've watched on YouTube or gaming or so forth. So this, we're catering to that. Remember who your audience is. Just like when you're talking a subject, you got to remember who your audience is so that you're not talking above them, below them, or on a subject that is inappropriate in any way, shape, or form. Okay, so test it out. So your lights, right now I'm a good 6 to 8 feet from my window. If I get closer, it's going to be hotter. Farther away, you're going to have less intensity. Same with any light. Fix it in a different position. Put it in different angles from you to see what works best for you, because what works best for me may not work best for you. People with different sized noses, it's going to be very, very different. I don't know if you guys have ever noticed this, but some of our favorite actors have large noses. Noses? They have large noses, and it's because it creates a wonderful shadow when they're being lit. Okay? So if you have a small nose or an unusual nose, just check it out, because it might be creating an effect that you don't care for. All right. Again, I know all of us, we're focusing on teaching. We don't care about the appearance, but it's about distractions. Okay. So let's see. I talked about household fluorescence. Don't mix tones. Oh, this is the last thing you have to think about. Well, that we're focusing on here anyway. Your background. Your background should be lit. Right now, my background is naturally lit by the sun that's coming in. So you happen to see all these wonderful dips and curves of the curtain. I'm creating shadows and light back there naturally. So it creates a wonderful depth to my background, even though when I was facing you, it was a flat wall. It still looked like it wasn't. In fact, I should say parallel, not flat, parallel. So you want to make sure that it's lit. Now, if you want to go off into total darkness, fine. But don't do that if you have dark hair or even dark complexion. If you have a pale complexion, that works great. But if you have a pale complexion, then avoid white. In fact, I avoid white in general. It just doesn't look good. It's distracting somehow. It's too much emptiness. Dropping off into darkness, great. Now, I will tell you this, please don't use virtual backgrounds. Mentioned that earlier. Don't use a virtual background, especially the ones that move. It's too distracting to your audience. And then they're more interested sometimes in what's happening with their virtual background than you. And I'll talk a little bit more about if you're not getting lighting back there, put up a lamp out of sight to light it up. You don't really want lamps too close to you in the background here because it's distracting. If it's really far back, then a small light that's not too powerful can actually be very interesting. Okay, so I think I've covered that. Let's talk about your composition. And I think
Carrie, can we just stop real quick?
Yeah.
Okay. Before we go into composition, how are you feeling?
I'm feeling good. I hope this is what you wanted, but please tell me what more, what less you would. Let's talk about composition. And what I mean by composition is what's around you, what's framing you, the patterns behind you, what your audience is going to see. For the most part, you want to keep it a clear background. I was in my office a couple of weeks ago on a Zoom meeting, and I noticed that I had a whole bunch of stuff on my shelves, pictures, globes, gifts from students. It was just a mess. And I realized that when I watch, I see that and I hate it. So remember to take notes yourself about what it is that you don't care for in other people's presentations that you're like, why did they do that? Sometimes we're doing it ourselves and we don't even realize it. So your background, make it clear. Nothing too busy, not a bunch of clutter, not a bunch of tchotchkes. You might have to clear your shelf or your background. I do like to have demonstration of who you are or the subject that you teach. But again, don't make it too busy. Otherwise, it just falls into noise. So you want to make sure you're lit in your background, like I have here. Like I mentioned, you might have to put a lamp pointing that direction. Shadows are good things. Like this curtain is creating shadows as the light falls across it. If you have a background that is uneven, like a curtain bookshelf, you can put a light that rakes along it, down the surface, Right now, the light coming from outside is coming at the same place, parallel to the curtain. So it's hitting it and creating all these little shadows. That's nice. If I had the light from just in front of me, it might flatten out the curtain and lose the entire effect of having any shadows. Sometimes just the shadow in your room is enough. I've seen people sitting in a room that's like beige, and they've got the camera pointed towards a corner, and suddenly you see a shadow at the corner of their roof, or creating some kind of draw of your eye. That's fantastic. It's a natural bit of shadowing. It's fine. You don't have to go crazy. We're not going to be doing shadow puppets. Okay, let's see. Never white, as I mentioned before. Please just don't use it. It's just not flattering. If you need it for a whiteboard, then please, please, please be sure to wear a darker color. I wouldn't wear patterns. I would wear blues, nothing too pastel, something that's counter to the white. And if you got white hair, sorry, I don't know what you can do about it. I often wear a headband to break up the white in my hair. Men, I don't know what you're into. You're going to have to work on it or just go with it. Or not use a whiteboard, use some other kind of board. Okay. Also, you want to be sure to wear something that complements your background. Right now I'm wearing a sort of a green that I thought looked blue. It doesn't really go with the red, but I have black that goes nicely with the background. You certainly don't want to have stuff that's clashing. That's, again, we're talking about white noise. That's distracting. By the way, when I talked about my white hair and the bandana, it's one of the reasons I wear headphones, is to break up that white so it's not so distracting. You, by all means, a lot of people use Zoom without headphones, that or they use the earbuds, something that's more hidden. That's your preference. I use this to break it up so it's not so distracting. Let's see, complement your personal coloring, right? If I'm this pale, I don't want to have a white background or a light background. If you have a deeper skin tone, then you don't want to fall off into darkness or a deep color that's in the background. You also, as I mentioned before, want it to complement your interests. I teach film and television. It's a curtain, red curtain, sort of a theme. In my office, I have, film reels on the wall, a poster of a film, but not too many, as I mentioned before. Something that leads to pull the audience in, necessarily remind them of what it is that you're teaching them or talking about that day. Let's see, and also anything that reflects your knowledge or subject. I do have my degree posted behind me, just happens to be there and I'm too lazy to move it. But I also have a very, very old globe that to me looks almost like a prop from a movie. I like it. I have it back there. Maybe somebody will see it and say it's too distracting. I'll take that note. Now let's talk a little bit about our framing. Framing is literally what we're seeing right now, okay? As I said before about your camera angle, that has something to do with your framing as well. You don't want to be too far away from the camera. I think that's distracting and you see too much around you. You don't want to be too close to the camera because it distorts your face and you don't really look like who you are, and it just gives this weird fisheye look when you get too close. Remember, this camera right here, as you can see when my finger gets closer, is meant to envelop as much space as possible. So think about that. Also, think about what's pushing your frame line. Literally pushing. Right now, my curtain ends, let's see if I can get my finger right, there. This little space might be a little distracting. So I either want to completely push the curtain out so we only see the red, or we push it in a little bit more so it doesn't look like we framed badly. You don't want to have something that's just almost coming into frame. Either have it in frame or don't have it in frame. So think about your framing also in the background for your for your composition. Sometimes it's really a lot more interesting to see depth, right? I talked about this before. I'm going to move my chair. I hope it's not too loud. I talked about creating depth from shadows. And right now I have this funky little corner right there in my room. You know, this is my dining room. And that can be interesting as long as I don't have something really, really distracting right there. And then you can also, let's say if I had lit that wall in the background, that might be too distracting of a background because you see how I have a mess right there, my television setup. Or let's see, this can be good if I'm here, right? And there's that little pocket of light in the background. That's a light that's above my door. A little light like that can be really nice. And the depth that it creates can be really nice. We're not trying to win an Academy Award for lighting, but we just want it to be something that draws people in and keeps their attention. I think when I said before, actually, I don't think I touched on this about being too gesticulating, moving too much. If you're moving too much, you know, yeah, I did talk about this. It can cause, I don't know, annoyance, a pain on the eyes. So you want to just stay in here in this general area. I have a tendency to be very articulate with my hands. I have a tendency to be very expressive with my eyebrows. Again, I would test this out on your colleagues. Just take notes. Try not to take it personally. Know it's all about presentation and making yourself look the best you can. I got a very good note recently about talking too fast. So I'm trying to slow my banter down, how quickly I speak, which actually is very, 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 very important with high schoolers, you know, even college students. If you talk too quickly, and certainly with elementary, they're going to miss it, especially the more complicated your terms, whatever that is for the age level. You want to make sure that they understand it and they're not just sitting there going, uh-huh, uh-huh, uh-huh. What did she say? Completely forgetting what you said the second you leave the meeting. And let's see, I think that's pretty much what I had to cover with you guys. The last thing I have written down is practice, practice, practice. Be sure to record your practices so you can go back and look at them. Take notes during your whole practice and take notes when you watch your practice, and be sure to be open to those comments that others make. If I can leave you with the most important thing here is being seen and being heard. We'll talk about sound another time. I will leave you with this. Sound can be the most distracting thing of all to anybody, even if you have a beautiful picture. So if you have any questions, we'll just open it up right now.